hip hop, hip hop, hip hop, hip
Bars is back.
hip hop,
Sam
hip
Ant.
hop,
Oh God.
hop,
What's
hip
up with you?
hop.
But when it became that, then it was about how much you have and how much the other person doesn't have. And you know, in the beginning, we would brag about things. You know, the rappers delight. I got bodyguards. I got two big. They didn't have that shit. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knew it, but it sounded fly. When
Right.
Jay-Z started talking about it, he really had it. And so people were like, man, I got to have that to talk about it. And that's when you were talking about it. They like, oh, he really got it. We need to get it from him.
Let's talk a little Tupac, man. Can you talk about first meeting up with Tupac and your first impressions of him?
Yeah. When I first met Pac, he was in a group called Strictly Dope. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Ray Love. He actually had a solo career as well, but him and Ray Love were rappers in the group. And like I said, Atron, who had signed us, who were on the label TNT, he asked us to listen to these guys that he was thinking about signing. So they basically had to audition and rap in the street in front of us. And when I first heard them, I thought that Ray Love and Tupac were equally talented. But once they stopped rapping and you started just hanging out and talking to them, it was obvious that Tupac had a larger than life personality from the very beginning. Like you could tell that he had that thing. He always commanded attention in the room, no matter who he was in the room with.
Digital Underground. Can you talk about him? You know, his stint with you guys and how that experience was.
What I did mention in earlier when we talked about Digital Underground is that, you know, how me and Fuse were Raw Fusion and we got into Digital Underground
Yeah.
basically to help further Shock G's vision. Everybody that was in Digital Underground basically was a solo act per se, but Digital Underground was more like a big production team to kind of help bring Shock's vision to life. And in return, Atron and Shock and everybody did everything that they could to make sure that we all got our solo deals and we all were able to branch out and do what we really wanted to do. So when Pac came, like, you know, Strictly Dope broke up and Pac was, what, you know, they were shopping him a deal and he was getting impatient and he really wanted to, he's like, if something doesn't happen soon, I'm leaving you, Atron. Atron's like, yo, can Pac rock with y'all? He was already part of our musical family, but he wasn't officially in the group. But we took him out on the on our first US tour. I think it was the Big Daddy Kane tour. And you know, like all of us, we did what our roles were in the group. But you know, everybody that met Pac, all the other groups, you know, like I said, if you know him, you know something about Pac. And he just started buzzing within the industry. You know what I'm saying? And we knew it wasn't long before, you know, he got his time to shine.
Does it surprise you now that 20 some odd years after his death, his name is still as strong and synonymous as it is today?
Kinda.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because when you're doing it, like, you never know. Like, you think that somebody has it, but there's a lot of talented people that just get derailed along the way, right? So it wasn't like we didn't think that he had the talent, but you know, I always tell people that I was like, well, what was it like? You know, what was it like sharing, you know, being on tour and being roommates with Tupac? What was it like being with Tupac back in the day? And I always say, back then, I was the bigger star. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, you really should have been asking Tupac what it was like to hang with me, right? In those times. And people, you know, now how he's revered, people take me saying that a little funny, but it's the actual truth. By the time that I want to say Dear Mama came out. He had got shot, went to jail. He had obviously he was out of he was beyond our stratosphere had ever been. So don't get me wrong. But from day one, I never thought 30 years later and 20 something years after his death that he would be just as relevant. He's up there with Bob Marley and Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
And Tupac, meaning you don't have to be a fan of the music to know who he is globally.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as in hip hop, as much as we want to, talent wise, the Biggie, Jay-Z, and Nas, whatever. Globally, Tupac is a known icon more than anybody in hip hop has ever been.
Yes. Tupac, you said in the interview, if I'm not mistaken, that Tupac changed when he went to death row. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, I don't know if I was misquoted because
Okay.
I've never spent any time around death row, so I don't know what was happening within the confines of that, whatever. What I've always said is Tupac was probably wilder before the world got to know him. Actually, by the time you guys knew who he was, he had actually calmed down a little bit.
Okay.
When we first met him, he was just a wild nigga that didn't have nothing to lose, and he was willing to do anything and everything. You know what I'm saying? He definitely had the drive and the work ethic, but he wasn't gonna be stopped. Let me just say that. Let me just say it like that. And there have been several situations, but I would say this. After you've been shot and you go to jail, you get set up by, from what I understand, people who you thought were your friends. It forces you to change, right? So you have to look at everything differently. You have to move a little differently. So I think just the circumstances of the life, whether he created or it was created around him, forced him to be, or didn't allow him to be as carefree as I knew him to be when he was with us,
Did you spend any time with Biggie and Tupac together? And next question will be, if you can answer on the back end, will be, where in your opinion do you think Tupac and Biggie went wrong in their relationship?
I actually met Big through Pac, when they were, I almost want to say, if I wasn't there when they met, it was shortly after. Because I remember Big showed up to one of our, I think we did like the first MTV Jams. If you ever see the one where Pac's doing I Get Around off the live band.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wearing like the Jalen Rose, Michigan jersey.
Mm-hmm.
He came down to the set of that. We hung out, and then maybe a few other times. And then, when Big would come to the Bay Area, because him and Pop were cool, I would check on him, like, ask if he was already needed anything. We were at a Gavin convention. I remember I sold him some weed one time. But in my opinion, I don't think that that Big did all of the things that Pop was saying he did. But I think that Big probably knew what was going to happen, and Pac was hurt that he didn't tell him. But then also surmise that maybe Big wasn't that guy that he claimed to Tupac that he was, to be able to speak out. You know what I'm saying? Because Pac was like, if you the boss in your town or whatever, Brooklyn, New York or whatever, then if you know something is going down, he's supposed to tell me. And I think it was a situation where it was bigger than something that Big could actually do. But I don't think Big ever wanted anything bad to happen to Pac. So it was just an unfortunate situation because they were really, really tight.
Appreciate that perspective. Talk about your autobiography, man. Talk about your book if you don't mind.
Yeah, man, I did a book, and you know, because I am Money B from Digital Underground, you might think it's a hip hop book, but it's really, in my opinion, like an American history tale. Just because, you know, my dad was in the Black Panther Party, so my story starts before I was even born, and and I grew up in that environment through the '70s. You know, I survived the '80s when the crack epidemic hit, and situations like that. Then you got the late '80s and '90s with the whole, you know, hip hop career with Tupac and Digital Underground, and even within that, um, I was almost like a hip hop Forrest Gump because I've been privy to and been in situations that people talk about, and I was like, damn, I was there. Like when Trouble T Roy with Heavy D,